Hey everybody, today is Monday, August 28th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from the Righteous Gemstones, editor and co-producer Justin Bourret.
I want the story to be the best it can be. I don't care where the idea comes from. We're all trying to make the best product possible. If there's ever a day where I'm not learning something new, I need to pack it in.
Editor Todd Zellin.
He wants to see the creativity. He wants us to take stabs at scenes that maybe aren't working off the page and rework them structurally. He really encourages that.
Editor Joseph Edinger.
I think that's one of the joys of being a professional artist is that there's kind of no ceiling. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to learn something every time.
And editor Dave Canseco.
My agent had me cut an editor's reel together, and she's like, there's so many dicks in this.
Yes, all that and more coming up on this edition of The Rough Cut. Okay, podcast time. It's me, Matt Fury. Or at least this is his microphone I'm using. How you doing this week? Are you in the mood to not only learn about editing, but have a few laughs along the way? Well, I know I am. Where can we go for such a thing? Well, it turns out it would be a rundown mall in South Carolina, because that is the, quote, base camp of the show we're talking about today. The Righteous Gemstones, or Gemstones as I'm probably going to call it for most of this episode. It just wrapped up its third season on Max. You know, Max, also known as the artist formerly known as HBO, but now it's called Max. Get it? It's a streaming service with movies and TV shows. TV shows like The Last of Us and Barry, both of which we've discussed in previous months here on the podcast. But what we haven't done until today is talk about Gemstones, which is an oversight on my part because this is a really fun show and, spoiler alert, it's a really fun editing team. And that team would be Justin Bourret. He did the pilot and also serves as co-producer on the show. And then you got editor Todd Zellin. And like Justin, he's been an editor on Gemstones going back to the first season. Next up is Dave Canseco, who has also been on the show since the beginning, but as an assistant and additional editor the first two seasons until making the jump to editor on season 3. Finally, we have editor Joseph Edinger, who joined this program already in progress on season 3. During our talk, we'll get into a little bit more of their shared history, so I won't spend any time on that, but I will give you a little more info on the show itself. The Righteous Gemstones depicts a family of televangelists and megachurch pastors led by widowed Patriarch Eli Gemstone, played by John Goodman. Eli and his immature yet adult children, Jesse, played by Danny McBride, Judy, played by Edi Patterson, and Kelvin, played by Adam DeVine, all lead opulent lives funded by church donations. Aside from starring in the show, Gemstones was created by Danny McBride, who also serves as exec producer, writer, and director at times. Busy guy. And in honor of that, we should get busy talking to his editing team. But before we do, I need to drop a little sermon on you about the Good Samaritans who sponsor this podcast. The always righteous Extreme Music. Way back before Moses even had a goatee, Extreme Music has been providing great production audio to film and TV makers all across this little world of ours. They have a massive catalog of tracks created by the top names in producing and composing. Though that catalog may be huge, it is so easy to find just what you're looking for. All you have to do is a simple keyword search on terms like tempo, genre, lyrics, composer, maybe throw in a Bible verse or two. They'll figure out what you want. Let's say you're looking for something for your new comedy about televangelists. You can even upload your favorite hymn to Extreme Music as a reference, and they will use their divine powers to find you tracks just like it. You can do all of this, including working out the licensing right there on the web, or you can actually talk to one of their saintly reps at an office near you. So to make sure your next movie or TV show sounds its very best and possibly secure your place in the kingdom of heaven, go see those mighty ministers of music, Extreme Music. Okay, enough of my blasphemy. We have a lot of cool editors to meet and way too little time to do it, so let's get going. From the Righteous Gemstones, here are Justin Bourret, Todd Zellin, Dave Canseco, and Joseph Edinger. See, Todd's already not paying attention.
I am? What are you talking about? Oh, it's because I moved my thing. Hold on.
I thought we should start off talking about how you got on the show. Justin, I believe you go back to the very beginning of the show, working on the pilot. Tell me about working with Danny to create the pilot and, making it something that would convince HBO, heretofore known as Max, I want to make sure we get that out there, to commit to making the series.
I had worked on Vice Principals, and that's how I met Danny and Todd and the whole Rough House gang. And when it came time for the pilot, Brandon James is also one of the executive producers at Rough House, reached out to me and said that Danny would like me to cut this pilot, The Righteous Gemstones. And right on that time, another show I was working on, People of Earth, got canceled after we wrote all the scripts for season 3, and so I was available. And Danny sent me the script, and as soon as I read the script, I knew it was something special. The tone that you were talking about earlier of comedy versus drama, a love of genre, was evident in that first script that I read, and the characters were so well defined. So Danny and I just talked about tone and music and kind of the direction he wanted to go, and we even did a kind of hair and makeup test trailer for HBO to kind of sell the show before we even shot anything. And we put the song we put to it, I liked so much, I put it at the end of the episode. So we were already making decisions even before any footage was shot. And when I showed my first cut, I was also working with Joseph Stevens, our composer, and DeVoe Yates, our music supervisor, from the get-go, so that we could have a sound for that first viewing. And Danny just responded really well to my first cut. And he brought up Once Upon a Time in the West, a Western, which is one of my favorite Westerns. So I was like, oh, he loves Westerns. So I kind of edited with that in mind and used a lot of the wide shots that he shot. And with face-offs, just cutting in kind of wider shots between characters. So we were on the same page on tone and character.
Well, Todd.
Yeah.
You did the first episode for season 3, correct?
Yeah. I cut the premiere and the finale this season.
One of the many things I think is really unique to the series is that you have these definitive closures at the end of each season. Not a lot of shows do that. In fact, I would say most shows don't really do that. There is always a fairly clear end, and you don't really drag that stuff forward into the next season. So beyond the recap at the start of each episode, you don't have much resetting to do for the new season.
Yeah, it's more about catching up with what they've been doing in between seasons, and not necessarily kind of just getting into the space of where the characters have been, where they're at now, their relationship to each other, their relationship to the church, and just kind of like teeing that all up and trying to do that. And that was one of the big undertakings of the premiere this year, was sort of trying to get through all of these scenes that were sort of all set up, that were very funny on the page, but, needed to essentially go from full-size scenes down to what you see in the premiere is sort of a montage of these 3 or 4 scenes put together, catching up. And so that was one of the big challenges, actually, was nailing kind of the first act of the premiere, just to like catch everybody up, make sure everything's fun and funny and we remember who the gemstones are, and then launching into the rest of the episode that kind of lays out where our story is going to start to go that season. And then we're off and running from there.
Why do you suppose that Danny and company, or all of you, went that route? What is the philosophy behind, we want to close this out every year?
That's just Danny. He does not like, endings that, he doesn't like. Yeah, he's talked about this in press a lot before, of just like, he feels, almost cheated with a cliffhanger right at the end of a season that you've invested all this time. And that's one of the things I actually really love about his storytelling, is that he's willing to put definitive closure and ends onto season and tell a full story and then move on and start the next season fresh. And, we carry themes, and we might carry some, character relationships over from 2 to 3, like, Aunt Tiff and Judy are, very much friendly now in season 3, when they were, and they had to build that relationship over season 2. So there's these little elements that carry us between seasons, but I feel like most of them are character driven as opposed to plot devices.
I mean, even in the pilot, Danny said that he wanted to close out each season, the main storyline have a resolution, and that it's characters that kind of carry us from season to season.
Todd and Justin, you guys have been on the show for a while. We got a couple of new guys this season, and I thought we should ask them about, when you're joining a show in progress for Dave and Joseph, what questions do you ask of the team, whether it's showrunner, post supervisor, co-editors, and what do you do to get yourself integrated as quickly as possible into this machine that's already up and running? Dave, why don't we start with you?
Well, actually, I was an assistant on season 1 and half of season 2.
Well, then that's cheating.
I know. So I know these guys. I've been on this show forever. My learning curve was actually learning how to be a full-time editor, because season 3 was my first season of television in the big boy seat. So a lot of it was just turning my brain off of worrying about where things are kept and more just trying to track a story and really putting a full episode of TV together.
Joseph, since you are the actual new guy then, and I screwed that up, let's hear from you about joining Gemstones and what you had to do.
Well, it's intense hazing, obviously, first.
The beating stopped eventually.
Yeah.
Yes.
The beatings do mostly stop after a little while. But yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's definitely a thing you have to learn as an editor coming onto a show, especially one that's already up and running, is how to start building relationships with people, because that's a big part of it for me. Is I love collaborating. I like having conversations in the edit room. I like talking to directors and producers and checking in as often as I can. Obviously, during a production schedule, that can be tricky sometimes, but the more you can do that, I think the better. Editing, I think, is often represented as like little cave dwelling people sitting, in our dark rooms, just tapping away on keyboards. But I think most of the best and most talented and most successful editors that I've known are also really, really good communicators. So that's something that, my mentors when I was coming up tried to teach me. So coming in, whenever you're new on a project, luckily these guys are really nice and wanted to help expedite that process and wanted to be available for questions and wanted to be present and be like, the show's not easy to edit, just so you know. It's like, and so they're like, please ask for help when you need it. Show us stuff when you need to, talk through. And so I did a lot of that, especially early on, but honestly, throughout all the way to the end. It's a really collaborative team, and people like looking at other people's stuff and showing each other things and just having that conversation and being like, what's not working? Something's weird here. What's not working? Or this scene should be funnier, or am I landing the right emotional beat here? Is this what we should be feeling? And I think that it just helps the show be so much better when you can work like that.
Somebody tells you the show's not easy to edit. I know we're going to get into the nuances of this, but what does that mean to you when someone says this show's not easy to edit?
Well, I think the show has a really specific tone. And like you're saying, that tone is not sort of set in place. Not to take anything away from a sort of like boilerplate sitcom or something like that. Those take talent and effort to put together too. But there is an established tone. There's sort of a rhythm that you can hit, a stride you can hit with cutting those sorts of episodes. Because you're like, okay, here's the framework. They're going to fill in different things for this. This show is just not like that. But, both of my episodes took very different kind of approaches to make them tick. You have just wildly different sort of themes and kinds of jokes that they want to tell. You have action sequences, you have really intimate moments between characters. It was a really fun challenge. I love a challenge, and it helps when you have creative partners though in that, because doing it alone I think would have been a lot harder. And honestly, all three of these guys told me the show wasn't easy to cut.
I interviewed Joseph, who knocked it out of the park, by the way. Great interviewee. And I think I told him at the time, this is not an easy show to edit. We're walking this tightrope of comedy and every other genre, be it drama or action or horror. These guys love genre, and you can see it in the show. I mean, even in the pilot, it ends with a wonder of Jesse running over one of the bad guys and then going back and running over the second bad guy twice. And it's darkly funny. You're laughing at it. But then you get to a scene with Eli watching Amy Lee on a past TV show and your heart's ripped out. So you'll have a very funny scene, even if it's dark. And then on a dime, you could be crying or feeling some sort of emotion. I mean, even in Joseph's episode, the naked fight. I mean, I think that's a great example of what this show is all about, where it's hilarious, then gets more dark, but still hilarious. And then again, you get home with Judy and it's devastating.
Well, we'll talk about the naked fight. And just to be clear, that's in the show. That's not behind the scenes.
That wasn't part of the hazing.
You don't know that.
I was so jealous when I saw that Joseph was getting that episode.
Oh, man.
He started bartering. He wanted to,
Oh, boy. Moving on. The show shoots in Charleston, South Carolina for some of the sets in an abandoned mall.
Yes.
So knowing that, are you guys editing on location? And if you are on location, is it near the food court? How does that work when you're editing in the mall?
It's not. It's on the other side of the mall from the food court.
Cross the mall.
But
Yeah,
you can get to the food court.
It's good, though. You burn some calories on your way to the food court.
Yeah. We are in the Sears husk.
Yeah.
It's so the Sears that Baby Billy starts or works in Locust Grove in season 1 is the Sears that the production is basically based out of and our edit rooms are in. And there's also sound stages built there. And, basically all of Eli's house interiors are in there. Jason's steakhouse interiors are in there. So yeah, they've taken over that entire anchor store of that mall.
And like half the mall at this point now too.
And there's still swag from Sears inside.
Is that what they give out to the crew at the end of the season?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do you feel about that? I mean, I've talked to editors that some like to be there, just the camaraderie and being close to production and being able to get certain answers at an accelerated rate. And then there are others that are like, I don't want to know how that day was or what went into that shot. And I want to be able to make my choices creatively, devoid of any sort of pain that might have happened on the day making that shot.
Well, for me, I tend to isolate myself from production as much as I can. I generally reach out to the directors, reach out to, ADs or whoever via email or text. I generally tend to try to stay away from set. I don't, I personally I always feel like I'm out of place there because I kind of am. I'm an editor. There's no place for me to go. I always feel like I'm in the way. And also, there's only so many days that they actually shoot at the Sears. So much of the stuff is on location around the Charleston area. And so really when they're shooting those specific, on those specific sets is when they're at the Sears. But usually they're out and about.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opposite. I like to be as close to it as possible. I like being able to ask questions. I like the energy of it as well. And I think it's fun to meet people from other departments that you wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to interact with as an editor. That's sort of part of what bums me out about editing sometimes. Is I don't want to meet and converse with the broader community that made this project happen. But, the hard part is that it's in Charleston and obviously all of us are in Los Angeles. So living out there for a while was a challenge just because it's I guess I live in another city across the country.
Yeah, it's like editing summer camp. You're just out there living the life of the show, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
For a location, Charleston's pretty amazing. And I was more hybrid this season. Season 2, because of the pandemic, my wife and dogs were able to come out, so I was out there the entire season. This season, for the first half of it, I was in Los Angeles. I would go out on hiatuses to work with directors and Danny and the gang. And then starting in November, which was the last block, I went out to Charleston full time until we wrapped picture.
Beyond the Gemstone family themselves, you have this fairly big, what I'll call a B crew of supporting actors. You have Keith and BJ and Baby Billy and Tiffany and Martin, Jesse's crew, Kelvin's God Squad in season 2, the Smut Buster Bunch in season 3. You have guest stars each season that are critical to that season's story arc.
Yes.
You even managed to cram Joe Jonas in there for season 2. Does any of that translate into being a challenged story-wise or just to make sure you're getting the right amount of the characters?
I mean, that does happen. I will say that they put a lot of work into these scripts. So it's pretty much there. I mean, it's like any show. Nothing's ever going to be the first cut. I mean, that's just a given. But I've never really had that much problem with the characters. I mean, sometimes we may want to take out a scene because we want to get to a character beat sooner. Yeah. But I feel like it's really well organized in the script stage.
I think it mostly comes down to the scripts are hilarious and really well organized, and the story really is all there. It's a matter of taking the scripts are always much bigger than what the show ends up being, and I don't mean that we're not losing set pieces or anything, but we are having to a lot of times take scenes that were 3 pages long and cut them down to what would be a page and a half ultimately with the final edit. So the challenge there comes down to okay, here's the scene. I know what it's supposed to do because I have the full version. Now, how do I make this efficient, keep it funny, keep all my character beats, make sure that who's ever supposed to get something out of the scene gets it or doesn't, depending on what the scene needs, and really just get to the essence and the core of what the scene is while keeping all the funny pieces going. And it is a little bit like spinning plates, but the ultimate goal really is to get down to what the essence of the scene is and what it's supposed to do in the larger story.
Story and character.
Yeah.
Story and character. It all just comes back down to that.
Yeah. I would say, if anything, the difficult part editing the show is more due to the fact that they shoot these things like a feature. I mean, Todd's always said, every week we're doing a mini feature.
Yeah.
So it means a lot of footage to go through on a TV schedule. So you're getting a lot on your plate. This season we cross-billarded a lot. So also keeping track of what episode am I doing right now and what's going to happen later. So keeping track of story and character in that respect as well. So you're not giving something away too soon.
Something else that can't be trivial to work on is the musical numbers. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to overlook that because in addition to the comedy and the action, you have actual musical numbers, which can be like action sequences unto themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
What is the production through post workflow for something like when the leads are singing in church or Baby Billy is singing a song around the pool at the resort, something like that?
I mean, a lot of it just starts with organizing everything in a way. I mean, we build big multi groups for these musical numbers, usually syncing all the songs so you can cycle through every camera angle of every take and make sure that you can get that part of the song on there. With the musical numbers, it's just laying it out, finding your angles, and then really trying to tell whatever the story is. Like the payday is really just selling. I mean, Justin cut that scene. He could probably tell you more about it. But it's really just about telling the story through that song and what Baby Billy's going through in that moment, what he thinks he is versus what is really happening.
Yeah, my assistant the last couple of seasons, Sarah Wall, who's also the lead assistant on the show. And so she kind of manages all the other assistants to make sure the train gets to the station on time. And she does an awesome job. But what Dave said, she gave me this big multi-group. On the script, it was just Baby Billy sings at a pool and no one's paying attention. And a guy does a cannonball at the end. I mean, that's basically what it says in the script.
That's how most of the montages are, by the way.
So many musical numbers are like Judy sings a song, and then you get a day of footage.
Or like the Gemstones walk into Jason's Steakhouse. That's like the line, and then you get hours upon hours, multiple cameras running at the same time of these ridiculous shots of them that get montaged into this
massive footage,
epic thing. Anyway, sorry.
So Danny did this cool thing where he had time and he goes, I want to just do this sort of musical type thing where Baby Billy's sort of in his head and he's singing to the camera and they shot all in these different locations. And once I saw that, the whole sequence sort of clicked for me. So I started sound-wise, it sounding like a sound system at the pool. And then once he starts talking to the camera, I played it like, Singing in the Rain, a musical, where it's just, any background noise is out and it's full on quality of the music. And it was one of those things where I was like thinking that the studio was going to say, let's trim this song down, but they had no notes on it. So I guess it worked.
You'd be surprised how often the discussion comes back to Singing in the Rain on this podcast, but it's true. The other big element for the show clearly is also the scale and the action. Car chases, gunfights, crashes, explosions. What is the VFX process for Gemstones, and where does the lion's share of it really go? Is it just to those larger, or mostly to those larger, more in-your-face elements that you want to overwhelm the audience, or is it in hundreds of little things that are not meant to be seen?
It's kind of both.
It's everywhere. This is a very VFX heavy show. I mean, like every season we have a flashback episode, which ends up being the biggest VFX episode.
Yeah, and that one, the flashback episode gets shot first. Mm-hmm. So we're actually shooting episode 5 at the beginning of every season so that they have time to do all the de-aging with Goodman.
Yeah, and actually kind of nice because in season 2 and season 3 we did that. And what I love about the interludes is they kind of not only show you a flashback what the family life of the Gemstones was like back then, but they also sort of give you some sort of clue of why characters are acting the way they are in the current season. So for season 2, I think it helped John a lot for Eli, his secrets. I remember when Todd got a sequence between Eli and Junior in season 1, he ran in and said, wow, John is totally nailing the scene because I think he's playing it like he wants to tell Junior what he did, but he can't.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As far as visual effects, Bruce Brannett is our visual effects supervisor, and he's on set to make sure we get everything. there's definitely visual effects in all the big sequences. As far as the church goes, we only have extras in like the front rows. So anything in the back, that's doubling up.
Yeah.
I think season 2, we did a lot of CGI crowds just because of COVID.
Yes.
And then season 3, when those sort of regulations easing up a little bit, we were able to get, and I believe they shoot plates of like they'll move the audience from one section to the other in the stands, and then they stitch all that together. So
right.
I'm not sure how much like CGI crowds were in season 3. I think they mostly did it with plates in season 3.
I think so.
Yeah.
And as far as de-aging goes, I mean, it's also a group effort. I mean, makeup and hair are doing their part.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a lot of work, but it just aids in the visual effect process of de-aging. And we've got great vendors. The Screen Scene does our de-aging in seasons 2 and 3.
Well, de-aging aside, are you doing a lot of temp VFX, doing a lot of intra-frame editing with animat and fluid morph?
We have an express rule on the show that fluid morphs are forbidden. So,
sorry.
How dare you?
You have to get special permission.
Yeah.
I snuck one in this season, and I felt like I broke the law.
Yeah, my rule is if I can see it, that it doesn't go in, and if it gets by me, then okay. You can have it.
I do animats pretty regularly. Usually I'll just do a quick temp mock-up of it and have my assistant kind of do the clean version. But I was also lucky. My assistant, Eric Ellington, is like really, really great with visual effects. So he was really instrumental in not only doing little things, but also like the hologram stuff.
Yeah.
He was a huge part of making sure that was delivered in temp in a way where the producers and Danny can see it.
Yeah.
Not look at it and be like, oh, we're done, but look at it and start thinking about how cool it's going to be. Instead of sometimes you put that in front of a showrunner and they're like, we may have a problem here.
Yeah.
So you're just trying to avoid that with those temp visual effects at all times, is just get things as cleaned up as possible to present to Danny. Because when you screen for him, he's not a backseat driver. So when we screen things for him, we're always trying to put our best foot forward. And that includes really polished temp VFX, putting stuff together so that he can get excited about what things are going to look like instead of getting, are we going to be able to make this work?
As realized as possible, like getting all the scenes, even if it's not the right piece of music, it's, let's say you've made a choice for a reason. You're not just putting something in there.
Right.
And so when we screen, I like just to think of it as like, just making sure that we've done everything we can do to make this as polished as possible at this point in the process. So that all those other things are not a distraction, because it is easy to get distracted by, things that aren't perfect.
Yeah. We have a great post team, a true family that we watch the episodes all together in a room, and they'll help out in these situations as well, trying to find stock footage. And Bruce and his visual effects team sometimes will give us mocked up visual effects just to kind of aid the process.
In the middle of each season, you do an episode called The Interlude. I think, Todd, you were the one that said, we do that one first because that's the most demanding.
Yeah.
How long does an episode of Gemstones take on average, and how does that compare to that interlude episode? Is the interlude episode longer just because of the visual effects that go along with it?
Honestly, like season 3 was so cross-boarded that I don't know how many days we had on every episode.
I have no idea.
No clue. It was so, like, literally these guys would be shooting, something for the premiere in the morning, break for lunch, and then they're shooting something for the episode 6 and 8 in the afternoon. You know what I mean? It was literally that piecemealed. And a lot of that had to do with, we started a little bit later in the year, so this started to have conflicts with actors and availability. And so I really have Justin, you might have a better idea because you actually talk to production a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I would say as far as days, we get a good number of days just because these are big episodes and a lot going on in it.
And on location.
Yeah. And so as far as ending interlude first, it's just so that we could have a little bit more time with the de-aging, because it takes a long time. And the chase in episode 2, they kind of shot that early so that we would have some time to get that in the right spot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more sequences. If there's like big set pieces, they may shoot that first just so that we have a little bit more time to deal with visual effects. As far as like a Sanctuary, there's a specific time of year that we can get the Coliseum. And I think it's July. So we have to shoot all the scenes then.
So we don't have to shoot in the middle of a hockey game.
Yeah. Actually, we kicked the minor league hockey team out of their stadium in season 2 because we had it.
The show obviously is hysterical, but you could remove all the comedy that comes through in the put downs between the siblings, the funny looks they give each other, the slapstick comedy that you have in the action. You take all of that out, and what you have left is The Godfather, Sopranos, Succession.
Mm-hmm.
Are there points of reference that Danny gives to you?
Yes, and the directors as well. I mean, they're big lovers of movies and TV. I mean, big stories. So they'll often give us like the Chase. I think Jody Hill brought up Baby Driver. The end of season 2, the end montage of season 2, they brought up Godfather, the baptism scene, which I could totally see. And again, when they bring things like that, it helps inform on how you're going to edit the scene or the sequence.
They brought up Magnolia for the locusts.
Yeah.
At the end of 9. So you get reference points sometimes, but I also think that's part of that, like, Danny's not sitting there with us and necessarily looking at every take. So instead, a lot of the notes we'll get on scenes are like, oh, I want this to have more of this kind of energy.
Yeah.
And so it's, you may not, you get a mixed sort of bag of how specific that's going to be. You may get a movie reference, but you also might just get kind of a vibe. And it's, I think just being able to take that and then all of us kind of sometimes sit together and be like, okay, what does this actually need? And how are we going to, get there? And then you go in your room and try and make it work.
Yeah. You just throw stuff against the wall until it sticks.
And Danny gives us kind of like a really wide berth of creativity. It's really, he wants us to come in with any and all ideas. There's never, you might get shot down, and there's plenty of times that, like, you come in with something that you think is going to solve X, Y, or Z problem, and it ends up like, there's no way that would work for, any number of reasons. But he wants to see the creativity. He wants us to take stabs at scenes that maybe aren't working off the page and rework them structurally. Like, he really encourages that. And I think you can see it across all the departments. It's like the costuming, Sarah Tross started, Christina took over, how, like, creative and outrageous those things get, the production design. Richard, he's,
amazing.
He incredible production design. And, that's all because there's a freedom that we get as creatives to really come at material. If we have an idea, we can feel safe to sort of go after it.
Joseph, I was sure when it came to references, you were going to bring up King of Queens.
That's just me. Whenever I'm editing, I just always have episodes of King of Queens on, just on loop. I just watch the seasons over and over again. All my editing is just based on King of Queens.
That's the Rosetta Stone for Gemstones, actually. If you want to break it down, it's just King of Queens.
Every editor has their thing. You can't help but wonder, skilled as they are, how the actors deliver some of these lines without breaking, because they're just so over the top and so crazy. Can you give me an idea of the amount of takes you're getting in some of these heavy comedic dialogue scenes? For example, the after church meals where they're all sitting around a big restaurant table taking shots at each other. That to me looks like something that would have a ton of footage and be a nightmare to cut.
You are entirely correct.
That was one of the first scenes I got. I was like new on the show. I got like a couple small snippets. And then the first big scene I get is my Jason Steakhouse scene.
Good luck.
Just like looking through the dailies being like, what is this? What am I looking at? I remember going into, Justin wasn't out there at the time. I had some phone calls with him though, but I remember walking into Todd's office when he was there and being like, help? What should I look at as a reference? I ended up watching the old Jason scenes over and over and over again. That's part of the challenge of the show, though, is they give you a ton of footage for those sorts of, like, tons of characters, tons of footage. You have every angle in there to work off of.
Every time you see a shot on screen, there's 2 other cameras that are associated with it. So you've got multiple eye lines happening at once. You've got 2 shots, 3 shots, 4 shots down the table, wides of the table, moving wides of the table. And then they're delivering different improvs and different lines.
Yeah, and those Jason scenes are the ones they improv the heaviest on.
But the actors crush it. The actors crush it, though.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, they really do. They work so well together and off of one another. So you get those scenes and you'd think that, if they're improving or if things get a little looser, that it's going to turn into chaos. And somehow they manage to not have it become that. And you end up with pretty cohesive footage considering.
And that's definitely the scene where people are going to break and laugh a little bit more just because they're a family and they're all a true family of coworkers and they're having fun off of each other. In the pilot, Edi definitely goes to town so, on those scenes.
She's so funny.
I remember her doing some bit of improv and it was great, but unless you're looking for it, you can't tell, but you can see Danny's shoulder because it was an over the shoulder shot and he kind of shaking a little bit because he's laughing to himself. So,
and those scenes are intense too for the actors. That's 12-hour day. That's a full day to do. Yeah. The Jason Steakhouse scene. So like they get punchy also by the end. And so, weird stuff gets said and, it's just like, it's all about just going through and figuring out like what's the best, what's the funniest, what's making us laugh the most. And also like what's the best for the character in the moment and where they are in the show.
I mean, the Prince Eric stuff in season 2, that was all Tim and Edi. I mean, they just
the Disneyland
stuff.
They're so good together.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Well, I have heard of editors that they'll say, sometimes I'll start with the last takes because I figure, well, the later ones are the ones that like, okay, we got it. But it sounds like if you've got a 12-hour day and the actors are getting punchier and punchier, maybe you can't use that method. Do you guys have an approach to how you try and get to where you want to be as quickly as possible?
Watch everything.
It's just watch everything. You have to watch everything on the show. There's just so much. If you miss it.
Yeah, I usually start my day by just kind of hitting play and you have your coffee and, you have a little snack or something. You sit there and you just kind of start watching stuff. And then once my assistant editor has a scene ready for me, then you're going through the scene and you're watching, as you cut the scene together, you're watching every line, every take as you then put those, takes in. So you're watching it kind of twice before you even sort of put it in the first time.
I was an assistant in the film days, so it's sort of a habit to watch all of dailies for me. And to me, it's kind of a meditative process. I like doing it. I'll even stop, rewind, take notes, pull selects. So I spend a little bit more time maybe than other people do when watching dailies. But for me, it's also a nice record of how the day went. You can see what they started trying, if they kept with it or if they dropped something. So it gives me a good idea of what they liked on set that day.
Yeah, that's a good indication of like what to present. Because like, first cuts of all this stuff, we obviously present the script, but there is so much more when the actors get a hold of it. And so it ends up becoming like what the script is doing plus what we think is funny, also what they've been trying throughout the day. So if they keep returning to an improv run, on my first cut, I'm going to have a version of that improv run that's funny and punchy and, just like tries to hit all the highlights of that run and see if it lands, and they might, we might ultimately end up dropping that and going for another thing or a simpler thing or getting out of the scene at a different time. But just sort of having that, knowing that they tried that so many times throughout the day shooting, they're going to want to see at least a version of it right off the bat, integrated into the scene. That's generally how I approach like the first cuts of that kind of stuff.
Well, with all of that footage and all those different angles, even with the improv, which I know can throw things off, can you use something like Script Sync to try and manage all that stuff and work through those scenes?
Yeah, all of these scenes are script synced. We wouldn't be able to cut the show without it. It would just be impossible.
I learned how to edit on Script Sync. I've never even tried without it. I mean, since I was, younger and, didn't have access to an assistant editor, I guess maybe I did. But as a professional in TV, it's like I live by Script Sync because it's just it makes it so much easier for me. Like I was saying, looking at every take of every line as I'm cutting a scene is almost impossible without it, at least sort of practically in the Avid.
It's like a map for us. I mean, especially with the comedy, finding where the improv was, where it fits into the scene. It's just such an important tool.
And our assistants also mark up all the scripts with all the improv moments. So we'll if there's a one-off, they'll just write out the line of dialogue and put the marker in there so we know, okay, I want to try something with that one time they said that one funny thing off the cuff, I can get to it really quickly. And then, and then they'll list other sort of improv beats by sort of the beat and say like, this is, these are all the attempts at, beat A, beat B, beat C.
I mean, sometimes I may, because these scenes can be quite extensive, it may take a while for the script to be done. So I'll, like I said, back to watching dailies, because I've taken so many notes, there are key moments I know I want to use. So I may sketch something out and then use script sync to kind of fill in the holes. And there's been scenes where I've cut without script sync, but where it comes in really handy, especially on this show, is when we start working with the directors and Danny, because if he wants to try something, it's like you can immediately, I want a different reading on that. It's like, yeah, like this, and you can immediately bring it up.
Yeah.
And because of the block shooting too, you may have done that cut of the scene, months ago.
Yes.
So no matter how intimate you got with that footage when it came in, unless you have a really, really sharp memory,
Dave,
you're really going to struggle to just dig back in and click right where you need to on the footage. So it also helps just with TV and film schedules, I think, with being able to jump back into something and be like, oh, right, this is over here.
Right.
Speaking of getting intimate with footage.
Great segue.
I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to bring this up.
We know exactly where you're going. We know it.
I know exactly what... Somehow I know exactly what's coming. And that wasn't a good choice of words either.
I'll just say that I haven't seen so much male full frontal nudity since gym class. So, I think on the one hand, it's like, hey, great, level the playing field. For years, actresses have been exploited in that way on shows and films.
Uh-huh.
But to this extent that you do this, it feels like there's a mission behind this. Like there is a point. Sorry, a point you're trying to make.
Normalize male nudity.
Normalize male nudity. It's or abnormalize it. One or the other.
If they shoot a penis, I'm putting it in.
Yeah,
I mean, that's sort of my go-to.
They want it in there.
Yeah, they do.
They put the work in.
I had to cut an editor's reel. My agent had me cut an editor's reel together, and she's like, there's so many dicks in this.
I think in season 1, we had almost every episode. In fact,
every episode.
Someone said not in interlude, and I went, no, I put a horse penis in. So yes, that counts. But I do think there is a normalization that I like about it, but I also think it's, Todd said this, it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just funny. A naked dude is funny.
There's like an absurdist line that the show walks though with everything. And it never tries to go too far over that line, but I think just the shock value of that, I think helps with that tone and just the wildness and unpredictability of the tone and helps you lean into that.
Yeah, I think that it really adds to the anything can happen kind of vibe that the show has, so that, we're going to push boundaries everywhere we can, but also make you laugh and also, tell you a great story along the way.
Well, and sometimes there's a logic as well. I mean, the naked fight, it would have been ridiculous for him to say, well, hold on, let me put on my clothes. I mean, so it makes sense.
Do you each have a bin set aside for those shots?
Joseph?
Immediately getting the dailies of that. Like John Watson, who's the director of that episode, did an excellent job with that scene and understood exactly what it needed to be. So he gave me just a really excellent roadmap to follow.
And then we all sat in Joseph's Bay watching that.
Watch some of the dailies. Yeah.
Every frame of that fight.
It's the hardest I have laughed at anything on any show I've ever worked.
I grabbed everyone that morning. I was like, everyone's got to see these dailies. This is just insane. I don't know what's going to end up in the cut. So y'all have to see the dailies before I put this together because it's just so insane.
Melissa, Angela, Haley.
Yeah.
Oh, people from other departments ended up coming down because they were laughing so hard.
It was a spectacle. We were all cracking up. But it came together and it works really well because it was on story and sort of, I think it worked so well in BJ's arc.
Yes.
Like the fact that he's so vulnerable in that moment and then BJ still gets overpowered and then BJ takes the dark turn. I think they used it and employed it really deftly as funny as that is to say, like really deft execution on the dick, but I mean, it really, I do think it actually works in the context of the story really well.
Yeah, and what we were talking about tone, I mean, it's one of my favorite moments when BJ realizes what he did, and it's no longer funny, except for maybe the look of the little girls, but it is tragic. And then just, I remember the first cut, I said, do not change that cut. It was a cut from naked Stephen to Judy waiting at dinner. And again, you had this devastating thing, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's kind of funny.
Well, as long as... Sorry, I need to compose myself. Okay, as long as we're talking about John Watson, other than the Gemstone kids, you have another holy triumvirate on the show. Danny McBride, Jody Hill, David Gordon Green share producing and directing duties. In fact, every episode, with the exception of the one we're talking about, was directed by them. This one, of course, was directed by Jonathan Watson. When you're working with a director who is new to the series, he may not be new to the team, but he's new to the series, or it's the only episode he's directed on the show. For you, is it business as usual as an editor, or are there things that you need to be thinking about and helping with when that director is new to the show?
I think you're always trying to keep an eye on stuff. It was harder for me because I was also new to the show. So
good point.
But I think Jonathan Watson is like an industry vet, and really he planned out all of his stuff really meticulously. And we had a few conversations early just around some of the early scenes. I was like, I think, let's talk through how you want to put this together. And we had, just a couple sort of conversations to get to know each other a little bit. And then, by the end of the season, I loved getting his dailies. I think he got so dialed in and planned his stuff so well. And you love that as an editor when you get a director that's meticulous in that way, because when you get the dailies, you're like, okay, there's a logic here. He really thought through all the things. So when you get, a new director or something, I think you just hope that they're like that, basically.
Yeah. And Jonathan's been with the Rough House, Danny and the Rough House gang for years.
Yeah.
So he knows their sense of style. And in fact, he came on as a co-executive producer season 2 and did a lot of second unit directing. So a lot of the cool motorcycle shots, including that amazing Gideon sort of where you lifts his legs up on that jump in the opening montage of Gideon. That was Jonathan. So he was already kind of shooting stuff for the show even in season 2. So I think Danny knew that he would knock it out of the park.
And he did.
If I'm going to ask about working with John Watson, I should ask about Danny. He's a showrunner, a writer, a director, and a star of the show. Does that factor, him wearing all those different hats, does it make it more efficient in post, or is it more of a challenge because he's being pulled in so many different directions?
I would say more efficient.
Yeah. Once we're in post, Danny just takes control, and this is really his show from beginning to end, and he's so dialed in on what he wants that it's really just finding it in the footage and putting it together.
Yeah, and they have an amazing writing team, John Fradley and Edi, all of them. And but at the end of the day, he created the show. He wrote the pilot, and Todd's always said he's the hardest working guy in show business, and he is. He is pulled in a bunch of different directions, but it comes to our benefit in post because he knows where all the bodies are buried and he knows what he wants. He's very clear on what he wants, and that's very helpful for an editor to have someone who's in charge, to know what show that they're making and to know that you're on the same page with them. And then, of course, the episodes that he directs, it's great because you're getting footage from the director who created the show. So if he does something several times, I go, okay, well, Danny's directing this. I know he's going to want it. It's pretty evident.
So you guys, it seems like whether you are on location together or somebody's hybrid, remote, whatever, seems like you work pretty tightly together. It's a very collaborative environment. Whether it's just this past season or all 3 seasons, no matter how long you've been on the show, have you been able to learn any techniques from any of your co-editors?
I learned so much from these guys because I assisted Todd and Justin and Craig Hayes, who was on seasons 1 and 2. So just really cutting for Gemstones, I learned from these guys. And in terms of techniques, it's really just ideas. Like there's a transition in episode 8 where we go from BJ in the bathtub to lotion in hands. And that was Todd. Todd's just like, throw that together, it'll win.
Todd's great for those. Like,
Yeah.
Todd loves a disgusting transition.
It's good to be known for something, Todd.
Exactly. I live for him. My bread and butter. My mother's so proud.
I mean, I always come into a project with the idea to learn nothing, if possible. No, I think that's one of the joys of being a professional artist is that there's kind of no ceiling. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to learn something every time and to get better and to hone your craft. And I love that. Like, I love that there's no ceiling because it's exciting to me that I can go into every single project and always have something that I'm going to get out of it. And I got a ton out of this project, partially because it's collaborative. I got so many different ideas on my cuts that I wouldn't have thought about. And you can internalize that and take it on to that next project and be like, how can I grow and learn from other people? Because you're just never going to have every possible answer to every question. So the more brains you have, the better and the more you can learn.
It's one of the reasons why I wanted, when we screen footage, to have at least all the editors in the room. But if we can do it, everybody in our post department, because I want the story to be the best it can be. I don't care where the idea comes from. I think I've heard a lot of editors say this, and I agree. We're all trying to do the same thing, which is, it's a job at the end of the day, and we're trying to make the best product possible. And so and as far as learning, I learn from these guys as well. I think if there's ever a day where I'm not learning something new, I need to pack it in. You should be always learning something new. You should always be growing. And that's, I think, one of the exciting things of our business.
Well, like what Justin just said, too, is so important bringing people into the room because access and understanding is one of the hardest aspects of this industry in moving up. So getting a PA in the room and seeing, even if they're too shy or overwhelmed at first to give notes, having them be able to see the process, because you can't imagine they want to stay a PA forever. They probably want to be an editor or a writer or whatever. And inviting people into the process, I think, is a huge part of just helping the next generation of people develop and learn skills.
I think one of the things for me is I didn't go to film school. I just so I don't have that deep background in any kind of film theory or anything. I feel like, being with these guys since I assisted on the 4th season of Eastbound, which was like one of the first shows that I got, one of the first scripted shows I got onto. Before that, I was a reality TV editor. I feel like through the process of working with the guys from Rough House, through working with Justin and all the other editors along the way, I feel like I went to film school through them in a lot of ways. So I've learned so much over, this is now, what are we talking about, 6 seasons of TV that I've made with these guys. It's been just insane learning experience.
Well, aside from the fact that I'm already prone to asking somewhat of an offbeat question for the last question, I was tempted to ask each of you to identify which of the Gemstone siblings you identify with the most.
I'm BJ.
Okay, see, that's why I didn't ask.
You say you're BJ, but you're Judy. Okay. Let's be honest here.
One of my favorite things about the show is Baby Billy. Mm-hmm. And of course, his take on Family Feud for the Bible, Baby Billy's Bible Bonkers.
Roll that around in your mouth.
I don't think I could. So after all your time on Gemstones, if the post crew were to compete on that show, how do you think they would do?
Bible questions really badly.
Very badly.
It'd be 0 to 0 to 0 to 0.
Well, as long as you do better than the Grips.
Yeah.
I guess it's not that important how well the editing team does with Bible trivia, eternal damnation notwithstanding. What matters is if they can tell a great story and work well as a team in doing that. And these guys sure can. Thank you to Justin, Todd, Dave, and Joseph for coming on the podcast and talking about their fantastic show. There will be a season 4. We just don't know when yet. But when it comes, don't forget it'll be on Max. And don't make me explain the whole Max thing again. Something I never get tired of explaining is how easy and affordable it is for you to get an Avid Media Composer of your very own. As you know, it is the preferred editing toolset of guests of the Rough Cut. And I sure would prefer it if you used it too. Or at least gave it a try. I think you'll like it. In fact, I am so sure of that, I put a link in the show notes that will take you over to the Media Composer page on avid.com. Well, I sure hope you enjoyed this episode. I did. Like I promised, we learned a thing or two and we had a few laughs along the way. Isn't that what life should be? I don't know. But I do know I'd like to have you come back so we can do this again sometime. Until the next one, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.